Medieval love stories, do they make sense to us today? What if love wasn't about hearts and flowers, but power, politics, and survival? Get ready to uncover 10 tales from the 11th to the 15th centuries that will make you rethink everything you thought you knew about love. Number 10. The Unseen Lover and the Knight's Oath. Imagine a world where a woman's love was so powerful it could summon a mythical guardian. This is the story of Princess Floris de Blois, whose tale unfolds in the 12th century, a time steeped in chivalry and magical belief. Floris, a young woman of noble birth, was deeply in love with a man she had never met. Her heart belonged to the Green Knight, a legendary figure from the ancient tales, a protector of the innocent and a beacon of justice. This might sound like a dream, a fairy tale spun by minstrels. But for Floris, this love was as real as the stone walls of her father's castle. She had heard the whispers of his strength, his courage, his unwavering virtue, and in her youthful imagination he became the embodiment of all she desired. In a partner, her father, a powerful count, had other plans. He intended to marry Floris off to a neighboring lord, a man of wealth and influence, to secure political alliances and expand his dominion. This was the custom of the age, a common practice, where personal desires were secondary to dynastic ambitions. Floris, however, was not content to be a mere pawn in her father's grand strategy. Her spirit yearned for a deeper connection, a bond forged not by land deeds and treaties, but by an invisible thread of destiny. She spent hours in the castle gardens, her eyes fixed on the distant horizon, praying for a sign, a miracle that would unite her with the Green Knight. One stormy night, as the wind howled through the ramparts and the rain lashed against the windows, Floris sought refuge in the castle's ancient library. Among dusty scrolls and forgotten manuscripts, she found a cryptic poem. An old prophecy hinting at a path to awaken the Green Knight spoke of an act of selfless devotion, a sacrifice of earthly desires for a higher spiritual truth. The poem suggested that only a pure heart, unafraid of isolation and committed to an unseen love, could truly invoke the legendary hero. Floris believed this was her destiny, her purpose, a way to defy the arranged marriage and claim her extraordinary lover. She began to dedicate her life to acts of charity and piety, forsaking silks and jewels for simple garments, spending her days tending to the sick and comforting the poor in the nearby village, her ladies-in-waiting whispered, and the court gossiped. But Floris remained steadfast, her heart filled with a silent vow to her unseen knight. Her father grew increasingly frustrated by her apparent lack of interest in her betrothal duties. But Floris held her ground politely, but firmly refusing to entertain her suitor's advances. She was preparing herself, she believed, for the arrival of her true love, the Green Knight who would surely appear when her devotion reached its peak. The chosen lord, a man named Baron Reginald, was a brute, known for his harsh temper and his ambition. He was also a fierce warrior, and her father, the Count, valued his military prowess. Reginald saw Floris as a prize, a beautiful trophy to be added to his growing collection of lands and titles. He found her piety and her refusal to engage in courtly flirtation strange, even unsettling, but he assumed it was merely a maidenly affectation that would disappear once they were married. The wedding date was set despite Floris's quiet protest. The castle buzzed with preparations, and the great hall was adorned with tapestries and banners. On the eve of the wedding, Floris slipped away from the feasting and the revelry. She went to the highest tower, a place she had chosen for her final act of devotion. She believed that if she could ascend to the heavens both spiritually and physically, her plea would be heard. She climbed the winding stairs, her simple dress fluttering in the breeze, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and fervent hope. As she reached the top, the moon, full and brilliant, broke through the clouds, bathing the world in a silvery glow. Floris knelt, her arms outstretched, and offered a final prayer, a desperate plea for the Green Knight to appear and rescue her from a life she did not want. Suddenly, a blinding flash of emerald light erupted from the heavens, followed by a thunderous roar. The ground trembled, and the castle guards rushed to the tower, their faces pale with terror. When the light subsided, the guards found Floris standing alone, her eyes wide with wonder, and at her feet lay a single shimmering green feather, larger than any bird's feather they had ever seen. The feather pulsed with a faint, otherworldly glow. The guards, hardened soldiers though they were deeply shaken by the display. News of the phenomenon spread like wildfire through the castle. Count, her father, was disturbed by the strange occurrence, interpreting it as a bad omen for the marriage. Baron Reginald, however, dismissed it as a trick. A maiden's hysteria, he insisted. The wedding proceed. But the villagers who had witnessed Floris's devotion and heard the ancient legends began to murmur. They spoke of the green night of a pact made between a pure heart and the very spirit of chivalry. On the wedding day, as Floris was led to the chapel, a murmur rippled through the assembled guests. The air seemed to shimmer, and a faint green aura surrounded Floris as she walked down the aisle. Baron Reginald, already impatient, scoffed, but as he reached for Floris's hand to seal the marriage, a voice deep and resonant echoed through the chapel. Seemingly from the very stones themselves, the voice declared that Floris was already betrothed, bound by a higher oath to a love that transcended mortal understanding. A gust of wind swept through the chapel, extinguishing the candles and scattering the rose petals. When the light returned, Floris stood alone at the altar, unharmed, but Baron Reginald was nowhere to be seen. He had vanished, without a trace, leaving only a lingering scent of sulfur and a trail of scattered coins. The Count, shocked and bewildered, cancelled the marriage. Floris never married. She continued her life of piety and charity, always wearing the green feather close to her heart. Chroniclers of the time noted her serene demeanor, her quiet strength, and the unwavering belief that her love for the unseen green knight had saved her. Her story became a legend, a testament to a different kind of love, one that defied earthly unions and found its fulfillment in an unspoken, mystical bond. Number 9. The spiritual bond and the enduring legacy. In the 13th century, a different kind of love flourished, one that transcended physical touch and societal expectations. This is the story of Saint Clare of Assisi and her profound, unwavering love for Christ. It was a love that shaped not only her life but also the lives of countless women who followed in her footsteps. Born Chiara Offreduccio in 1193, Clare came from a wealthy and influential noble family in Assisi, Italy. Like many young women of her standing, she was expected to marry into a prominent family, secure alliances, and bear heirs. But Clare felt a deep, spiritual yearning from a young age, a desire that set her apart from her peers. She was drawn to a life of poverty, prayer, and devotion, a stark contrast to the luxurious existence her family offered at the age of 18. A pivotal moment arrived for Clare. She was deeply inspired by the radical teachings of Saint Francis of Assisi, a Mennonite preacher who had renounced all worldly possessions to live a life dedicated to God and service to the poor. Francis's message resonated deeply within Clare's soul. She saw in him a path to a more profound connection with the divine, a love that promised eternal fulfillment rather than temporary earthly pleasures. This was a love that defied the traditional understanding of marriage and romantic partnership, offering a spiritual alternative that was both revolutionary and deeply personal. On the night of Palm Sunday in 1212, Clare made a dramatic and irreversible decision. She secretly left her family home, accompanied by her aunt, and made her way to the tiny chapel of Portiuncula, where Francis and his followers resided. There, in a simple, heartfelt ceremony, Francis cut off her hair, a symbolic act of renouncing her worldly status and dedicating herself fully to God. She exchanged her rich garments for a coarse tunic and a veil embracing a life of radical poverty and spiritual devotion. This act, unthinkable for a woman of her social standing, was a powerful declaration of her love for Christ, a marriage to the divine that superseded any earthly union. Her family was furious. They tried to retrieve her even physically, dragging her from the small church where she had taken refuge. But Clare clung to the altar, refusing to be removed. She declared her steadfast commitment. a love that would not be swayed by familial pressure or societal norms. Francis, recognizing her unwavering resolve, placed her in a small monastery of Benedictine nuns. Soon after, her younger sister Agnes joined her, followed by other noblewomen, all drawn by Clare's radical commitment to spiritual love and poverty. They formed a new order of contemplative nuns, later known as the Poor Clares, dedicated to a life of prayer, austerity, and communal living, mirroring the Franciscan ideals. Clare became the abbess of San Damiano, the church Francis had rebuilt with his own hands. For over 40 years, she led her community with unwavering dedication, guiding them in a life of extreme poverty and deep spiritual contemplation. Her love for Christ was the central focus of her existence, manifesting in profound prayer, self-denial, and an unshakable faith. She called herself the Bride of Christ, a common mystical concept of the time. But for Clare, it was a lived reality, a tangible, loving relation that informed every aspect. She wrote extensively, not about romantic love, but about the joy of spiritual union, the beauty of poverty, and the profound intimacy she felt with the divine. Her letters to Agnes of Prague, a Bohemian princess who also embraced the Franciscan way, spoke of the deep spiritual kinship they shared, a bond rooted in their shared devotion to their divine beloved. Clare's love for Christ was not passive. It was active and empowering. When her monastery was threatened by invading Saracen armies in 1240 and again in 1241, Clare, though frail and ill, reportedly faced the attackers at the monastery gates, holding up the Blessed Sacrament. Historical accounts describe the invaders turning back in fear, a testament to her profound faith and the perceived power of her spiritual love. Chroniclers noted that her presence, bolstered by her unwavering devotion, instilled a fear that drove the soldiers away. This act of courage was not born of martial prowess, but of a fierce protective love for her community and her divine husband. Clare's life was a radical departure from the expected path for women in the Middle Ages. She chose a love that transcended earthly desires, a commitment that was both liberating and intensely personal. Her legacy is not just the Order of Poor Clares, which still exists today, but also the enduring example of a woman who defined love on her own terms, finding ultimate fulfillment in a spiritual union. Her story challenges the very definition of a love story, pushing beyond the confines of human romance to explore the depths of divine affection and personal devotion. She proved that love could be a powerful force for autonomy, rebellion against societal norms, and a pathway to profound spiritual intimacy, a love that resonated with a purity rarely seen in the often turbulent world around her. She died in 1253, having spent her life in service to this profound spiritual love. Number 8. The Price of Loyalty in a Viking Blood Feud. This is not a tale of courtly romance or forbidden passion, but of unwavering loyalty and brutal necessity in a world shaped by honor and vengeance. Welcome to 10th century Iceland, a land of harsh landscapes and even harsher laws, where family ties were everything and a wrong could only be righted with blood. This is the story of Gisli Sursom and his wife Oddbjørla Dottir, a couple whose bond was tested by betrayal, murder, and a relentless blood feud. Their saga, Gisli's saga, recounts a love forged not in tenderness, but in shared hardship and a fierce commitment to one another in the face of insurmountable odds. Gisli was a proud and capable chieftain, a man of integrity, living in a society where honor was paramount. He had 3 other close relationships: his brother Thorkel, his brother-in-law Vestein, and his brother-in-law Thorgrim. In a fateful twist of events, Gisli found himself caught in a web of deceit and misplaced loyalties. It was a time when alliances were sealed with solemn oaths, and breaking them could lead to dire consequences. A series of events, including a dream Gisli had about a knife, and the involvement of his wife, Odd and Thorkel's wife, Asgerd, led to a tragic chain reaction. Thestane Gisli's trusted friend and brother-in-law was murdered while sleeping in Gisli's house. Killer was unknown, but suspicion fell quickly on Thorgrim, who had cause to dislike Thestane. Gisli, bound by the unwritten laws of blood vengeance, knew he had to avenge Vestain's death. But avenging Vestaine meant striking at Thorgrim, his other brother-in-law, the husband of his sister Thordis. This was a direct conflict of loyalty, a choice that would tear his family apart. Despite the agonizing dilemma, Gisli made his choice. He secretly entered Thorgrim's house and killed him in his sleep, plunging a spear into his chest. This act immediately ignited a ferocious blood feud, a cycle of violence that would consume Gisli's life and test the limits of Odd's devotion. The murder of Thorgrim immediately turned his kinsmen, led by Bork the Stout, against Gisli. Bork was a powerful chieftain, and Gisli's brother Thorgale sided with him, further complicating matters. Gisli was declared an outlaw, a man stripped of his rights, hunted by all who wished to gain honor or bounty. This was the ultimate condemnation in Viking society, condemning a person to live a life on the run, dependent on the loyalty of a very few. Most people would have abandoned an outlaw, fearing the repercussions of aiding him, but Odd, Gisli's wife, was not most people. Odd's love for Gisli was not a soft, gentle affection. It was a fierce, unyielding resolve, a bedrock of support in a collapsing world. For 13 years, Gisli lived as an outlaw, hunted relentlessly across Iceland. During this entire time, Odd remained by his side, providing him with food, shelter, and comfort in secret. She hid him in caves, brought him news, and tended to his wounds. She endured constant threats, interrogations, and a suspicion of Bork and his men, all while maintaining her unwavering silence and cunning. Chroniclers recount specific instances of her resourcefulness, such as diverting pursuers or creating false trails to protect her husband. There were moments of unimaginable hardship. Odd had to sneak through the wilderness, often in the dead of night, enduring harsh weather and dangerous terrain to reach Gisli's hiding places. She risked her own life, her freedom, and her social standing every single day. She was offered bribes, tempted with promises of wealth and security if she would only reveal Gisli's whereabouts, but she never wavered. Her commitment to him was absolute, a silent promise made not with flowery words but with her every action. Her loyalty was a stark contrast to the shifting allegiances of other characters in the saga, who were often motivated by personal gain or fear. The saga describes how Odd once managed to escape from Bork's men, who were trying to capture her and force her to reveal Gisli's location. She famously tricked them, fleeing through a deep swamp, knowing they would not dare follow her into the treacherous ground. Another time, she managed to arrange for Gisli to spend a winter in a hidden cabin, risking detection by transporting supplies under the very noses of their pursuers. These are not acts of a fragile woman. They are the actions of a partner forged in fire, dedicated to the survival of her beloved. Eventually, after years of relentless pursuit, Gisli was cornered by his enemies. He fought bravely, taking down several of his attackers, but he was outnumbered and wounded. Even in his final moments, as the battle raged, Odd was there, providing him with moral support, perhaps even a weapon or a shield, doing everything she could to aid him. The sagas describe her unwavering presence at his side during his last stand on a rocky outcrop. She did not flee, she did not surrender. She remained with him until the very end, a testament to a love that defied all conventional understanding of comfort and safety. After Gisli's death, Odd did not seek revenge or remain. To mourn in a traditional sense, her devotion to him transcended the earthly realm. The saga recounts that she left Iceland and traveled to Rome, where she converted to Christianity and became one of the first Icelandic women to make such a pilgrimage. This final act was a profound testament to her spirit, a transformation that allowed her to find solace and a new purpose after the brutal intensity of her life with Gisli. Her love for Gisli was not one for the faint of heart. It was a bond forged in the crucible of violence and survival, a love that proved stronger than any blood feud, any decree of outlawry, and even death itself. It was a love that defied the very concept of peace, instead finding its deepest meaning in relentless loyalty and unwavering support in a chaotic, dangerous world. Number 7. The Holy Groom and the Mystical Union. This is not a tale of a knight and a lady, but of a woman's intense devotion to a divine being, of love so profound it shaped her entire existence. In the 13th century, a time of profound spiritual fervor, Hedwig of Antwerp emerged as one of the most remarkable mystics of her age. She was a Bravantine beguine, a woman who lived a religious life outside of a formal monastic order, dedicated to God without taking permanent vows. Hedwig's love was directed towards Christ, whom she experienced as her holy groom, her true spouse, in a profound mystical marriage. This concept, known as bridal mysticism, was not unique, but Hedwig's articulation of it, particularly in her vivid visionary experiences and powerful prose, stands as a testament to a form of love that defies modern understanding of human relationships. Little is known of Hedwig's earthly life. She was likely well educated, probably from a noble or wealthy family, as evidenced by her sophisticated literary style and knowledge of theological concepts. She led a community of beguines, guiding them in their spiritual journey. But her true story unfolds in her writings. Her visions, letters, and poems in stanzas, where she meticulously documented her spiritual journey and her overwhelming love for Christ. These writings are not mere theological treatises, they are passionate declarations of love, intimate conversations with her divine beloved, filled with yearning, joy, and often agonizing separation. Hedwig described her love for Christ as min, a Middle Dutch word that goes beyond simple affection. It encompasses an all-consuming boos love, a hunger for God that pervades every fiber of her being. She sought min in its fullness, desiring to become one with Christ, to participate in the divine love that binds the universe. This was not a passive, contemplative love. It was an active, striving love, a constant pursuit of deeper union. Her visions detail ecstatic encounters where she experienced Christ not just as a spiritual presence, but as a tangible, loving figure, a man who embraced her and nourished her soul. In one of her most famous visions, Hedwig recounted a Christmas morning experience. She saw Christ appear to her as a beautiful young man, approaching her like a lover. He embraced her, feeding her with himself, a symbolic act of spiritual communion that she described with intense physical and emotional detail. She wrote that he gave me to eat from his body, and he gave me to drink from his blood. My whole body felt intoxicated. This was not literal cannibalism, but a deeply personal, intimate participation in the Eucharist, transforming it into a profound act of spiritual marriage. For Hedwig, this was the ultimate expression of love, a union that transcended the limitations of human flesh and mundane existence. Her letters reveal the practical challenges and joys of this mystical love. She advised her spiritual daughters, the other beguines, on how to cultivate this intense devotion, how to navigate the dark nights of the soul, and how to surrender fully to the will of God. She stressed the importance of active engagement with the world, of living out min through acts of charity and humility, even while seeking inner union. This was not a reclusive love. It was a love that sought to permeate all aspects of life, making the ordinary extraordinary. Hedwig's poems and stanzas are perhaps the most poetic expressions of her love. She used the language of courtly love with its themes of longing, service, and passionate desire for a beloved. But she transposed these concepts onto her relationship with Christ. She spoke of Christ as her Lord and lover, a divine knight who commanded her heart and loyalty. This appropriation of secular romantic language for sacred purposes was common among mystics of the time, allowing them to express the intensity of their spiritual experiences in terms familiar to their audience. However, Hedewich's descriptions went beyond a mere metaphor. For her, the love was real, palpable, and profoundly personal. Her spiritual journey was not without its struggles. She experienced periods of intense spiritual desolation, moments when Christ seemed absent, leaving her in agonizing loneliness. She described these periods as a hell of separation, a torment that tested her faith and her love. Yet these periods only deepened her resolve, pushing her to seek men with even greater fervor. She believed that true love required enduring these trials, proving one's faithfulness through suffering. This concept of love as a challenging good journey, rather than a blissful state, offers a stark contrast to many modern romantic ideals. Hedewich's love was fiercely independent. As a beguine, she was not bound by the strict rules of a monastic order or the expectations of a married woman. This freedom allowed her to pursue her spiritual love with an intensity that might have been stifled in other contexts. Her writings provide a rare glimpse into the inner life of a medieval woman who chose a path of radical spiritual autonomy, finding fulfillment in a profound relationship with the divine. Her legacy lies not just in her beautiful, challenging texts, but in her unwavering commitment to a love that was unseen, unheard by mortal ears, yet deeply felt and profoundly. She showed that love could be an all-consuming force, a direct pathway to the divine, defying the very boundaries of human understanding and earthly relationships. The exact date of her death is unknown, but her profound spiritual love continues to resonate centuries later. Number 6. The Scholar, the Student, and the Blade. 12th century, a time of burgeoning intellectualism and rigid societal norms, played host to one of the most enduring and tragic love stories, that of Peter Abelard and Heloise. Their connection was one of fiery intellect, forbidden passion, and devastating consequences. A tale preserved to their remarkably candid letters, which continue to shock and intrigue readers centuries later. Peter Abelard was a brilliant and renowned philosopher, theologian and teacher, whose lectures in Paris drew students from all over Europe. He was known for his sharp mind, his eloquence, and his controversial views that challenged established church doctrine. In his late 30s, he was at the height of his fame, respected, admired, and perhaps a little arrogant. Heloise was a young woman of exceptional intelligence and beauty, living with her uncle, Canon Fulbert, a high-ranking cleric in Paris. She was fluent in Latin, Greek, and Hebrew, an extraordinary accomplishment for a woman of her time, and was celebrated for her sharp wit and deep learning. Fulbert, proud of his niece's intellect, sought the best possible education for her. He hired Abelard, the most celebrated scholar of the age, to tutor Heloise privately. This arrangement, seemingly innocent on the surface, laid the groundwork for a scandalous affair that would shatter both their lives. Abelard, in his autobiographical work, The History of My Calamities, recounts how he deliberately sought to seduce Heloise. He admitted to abusing the trust placed in him by Fulbert, using his position as a tutor to gain access to her. Their lessons quickly turned into clandestine meetings, their shared love for knowledge blossoming into an intense physical and emotional affair. Their bond was forged, not just in passion, but in a profound intellectual connection. They were equals in intellect, a rarity in an age where women were often denied formal education. Their letters, exchanged years later, reveal a depth of understanding and mutual respect that went beyond mere physical attraction. They discussed philosophy, theology, and the very nature of love itself. The affair continued in secret for some time, hidden beneath the cloak of their academic pursuits. Secrets, especially in a bustling medieval city like Paris, rarely remain hidden forever. Eventually, Heloise became pregnant. This was a catastrophic development. For Abelard, a cleric, though not yet a priest, and a rising star in the church, a child out of wedlock would mean the end of his academic career, his reputation, and his future. For Heloise, an unmarried mother in medieval society, it would mean social ruin and ostracization. To protect them, Abelard spirited Heloise away to his family home in Brittany, where she gave birth to a son whom she named Astrolabe. Abelard then proposed a secret marriage, hoping to legitimize the child and partially salvage their reputations. Heloise surprisingly resisted the idea. She argued passionately against it, not out of a lack of love, but out of a profound understanding of Abelard's destiny. She knew that marriage would be a grave impediment to his academic and ecclesiastical ambitions, that it would effectively end his brilliant career. She believed his intellectual gifts were meant for the world, not to be confined by domesticity. She was willing to endure the shame of an illegitimate child if it meant preserving his potential. This was a love that valued the beloved's greater calling over personal happiness, a concept that defies modern romantic notions of shared domestic bliss. Abelard, however, insisted they married in secret with only a few witnesses, hoping to keep the union hidden from the world and especially from Fulbert. But Fulbert soon discovered the marriage, and he was enraged, feeling betrayed and dishonored. He believed Abelard had tricked him and ruined his niece. In a vengeful act of brutal punishment, Fulbert hired thugs to break into Abelard's lodgings and castrate him. This horrific act effectively ended Abelard's career as a public figure and, physically, his ability to participate in an earthly marriage. Traumatized and shamed, Abelard decided to become a monk. He insisted that Heloise too take the veil and become a nun, despite her continued objections and her argument that she should be allowed to choose her own path. She eventually complied, becoming a nun at Argentou, and later the abbess of the Paraclete, a convent that Abelard established. They lived separately for years, dedicated to their religious lives, but their intellectual and emotional bond remained, years later, their correspondence. These letters, discovered after their deaths, formed the core of their enduring legacy. Heloise, now a respected abbess, wrote to Abelard expressing her enduring love for him, her sorrow for their past, and her regret for the life they could have had. She famously admitted that even in her prayers her thoughts were of him, not of God. She questioned the nature of their love, the justice of their fate, and the meaning of suffering. Abelard in turn offered spiritual guidance, often with a detached theological tone, struggling to reconcile his past passion with his present monastic vows. Their letters reveal a complex, multifaceted love, intellectual admiration, passionate desire, spiritual yearning, and profound grief. Heloise's raw emotional confessions stand in stark contrast to Abelard's more measured responses, highlighting the different ways they processed their shared trauma and their enduring connection. It is a love story defined by sacrifice, brutal consequences, and a bond that transcended physical separation and forced religious vows. It was a love that even in its brokenness endured, leaving behind a haunting record of two brilliant minds and hearts forever intertwined by fate and circumstance. Abelard died in 1142, and Heloise in 1164, buried side by side. Their story forever etched in the annals of history. Number 5. The King, the Favorite, and the Furious Barons. This is a story not of romantic love in the traditional sense, but of an intense, all-consuming bond between a king and his favored companion that rocked an entire kingdom to its core. In the early 14th century, England was ruled by King Edward II, a monarch who, by many historical accounts, was less interested in affairs of state and warfare than in companionship, entertainment, and a lavish lifestyle. His reign was dominated by a relationship that defied the expectations of his time, infuriated his powerful barons, and ultimately led to his downfall. This was the bond between Edward II and Piers Gaveston. Piers Gaveston was a Gascon knight, handsome, modog, and fiercely ambitious. He had been a companion of Edward since childhood, and their connection was immediate and profound. When Edward became king in 1307, he showered Gaveston with titles, wealth, and power, elevating him far beyond his station. Gaveston was made Earl of Cornwall, given vast estates, and treated with an intimacy and favoritism that shocked and angered the English nobility. Edward openly calls Gaveston his brother, and historical chronicles describe the king's almost obsessive affection. This favoritism went beyond mere friendship. It bordered on infatuation, openly displayed in a manner that was deeply unconventional for a medieval king. The chroniclers of the time, often biased and writing from a perspective that condemned their relationship, noted the king's excessive gifts to Gaveston, his preference for Gaveston's company over that of his own Queen Isabella of France, and his disregard for traditional courtly decorum when Gaveston was present. The Vita Edwardi Secundi, a contemporary chronicle, states that Edward exhibited too much love for him, and that he preferred Gaveston to all others. This was not just a matter of personal preference, it was a political disaster. The barons, powerful magnates who expected to advise the king and benefit from his patronage, found themselves sidelined and humiliated by Gaveston, who was often insolent and mocking towards them. Gaveston, emboldened by the king's unwavering support, made powerful enemies. He gave insulting nicknames to leading nobles, flaunted his wealth, and openly criticized the king's decisions. The barons viewed him as an upstart, a foreign parvenu who corrupted the king and undermined the authority of the realm. Their anger was not just about jealousy, it was about the perceived subversion of the established social and political order. King was expected to rule with wisdom, to consult his nobles, and to produce an heir. Edward's obsession with Gaveston seemed to disregard these duties. The political crisis escalated rapidly. The barons, led by the king's cousin Thomas, Earl of Lancaster, demanded Gaveston's exile. Edward, deeply distraught, reluctantly agreed, multiple times only to recall his favorite shortly after. This cycle of exile and return further inflamed the barons' fury. Each time Gaveston returned, Edward showered him with even more honors, making it clear where his true affections lay. The king's emotional dependence on Gaveston was palpable, revealed in his desperate attempts to keep him close, even at the cost of alienating his entire kingdom. In 1311, the barons forced Edward to accept the ordinances, a series of reforms designed to limit royal power and, crucially, to permanently banish Gaveston. The ordinances specifically stated that Gaveston was to be exiled forever, and that any attempt to recall him would result in the forfeiture of his lands. Yet, defying these powerful decrees and the will of his entire nobility, Edward recalled Gaveston once more in 1312. This was the breaking point. The barons, no longer willing to tolerate the king's defiance, took matters into their own hands. They hunted Gaveston down. After a siege at Scarborough Castle, Gaveston surrendered to the Earl of Pembroke, who promised him safe passage. However, the Earl of Warwick, known as the Black Dog of Arden, seized Gaveston, tried him for treason without the king's knowledge, and executed him on Blacklow Hill. On June 19, 1312, this brutal act, carried out by the most powerful men in the kingdom, was a direct challenge to the king's authority and a devastating blow to Edward personally. Edward was heartbroken and enraged by Gaveston's death. He never truly forgave the barons, and his grief seemed to consume him. For years, the political landscape of England was shaped by the king's desire for vengeance. Against those who had murdered his favorite, the execution of Gaveston did not solve Edward's problems. It merely deepened the divisions within the kingdom and further isolated the king from his nobles. His intense bond with Gaveston was replaced by other favorites, most notably Hugh Despenser the Younger, leading to similar patterns of resentment and conflict. The relationship between Edward II and Piers Gaveston defies modern understanding because it highlights how personal affection, when displayed so openly and intensely in a position of power, could directly lead to political instability and violence in the medieval world. It was a love that went against the very grain of kingly duty, as understood by the time, sacrificing political expediency and stability for an emotional connection that was deemed scandalous and disruptive. The consequences of this bond ultimately contributed to Edward II's deposition in 1327 and his subsequent death, a chilling testament to the power of a love that refused to conform. Number 4. The Fairy Knight and the Rejected Queen. Step into a world where love could be found in the realm of fairies, where oaths were sacred, and breaking them could lead to exile from both earthly and magical lands. This is the tale of Lanval, a knight from the court of King Arthur, as recounted by Marie de France in her 12th century Legacies. It is a story that defies modern understanding of love by introducing elements of magic, sacred vows, and the severe consequences of betrayal, all within the framework of medieval courtly romance. Lanval was a knight at King Arthur's court, but he was overlooked, unrewarded, and felt deeply lonely. Unlike his peers, who were showered with gifts and attention, Lanval was left out a reflection of his own inherent goodness, and perhaps a lack of the necessary political maneuvering. He felt a deep sense of isolation despite being in the most celebrated court of the age. One day, feeling particularly despondent, Lanval rode his horse into the countryside. Seeking solitude, came across a stream, and there by its banks, 2 maidens of exquisite beauty appeared, dressed in rich, flowing garments. They invited him to a magnificent pavilion hidden deep in the forest, where he encountered a lady of unparalleled beauty, sitting on a bed draped in silk and gold. This lady was a fairy queen, powerful and ethereal, and she immediately declared her love for Lanval. She offered him immense wealth and boundless happiness on one condition: he must never ever reveal their secret love to anyone. If he broke this oath, she warned, he would lose her forever, and all the magical bounty she had bestowed upon him would vanish. Lanval, overwhelmed by her beauty and the sudden outpouring of affection, swore the oath. This was a love born of magic and a profound, secret pact, a stark contrast to the public, often political, marriages of the time. It was a love that existed outside the human world, subject only to its own mystical rules. The fairy queen granted Lanval immense riches. His coffers were always full, no matter how much he spent. He became generous and popular, his newfound prosperity attracting the admiration of the court. He participated in tournaments, his armor gleaming, his horses swift, yet no one knew the source of his sudden fortune. He was content, in his secret love, meeting his fairy lady whenever he wished, his heart filled with a joy he had never known before. This arrangement highlights a medieval understanding of love that could involve a profound secret, a hidden life that brought joy, but also immense risk. The problems began with Queen Guinevere, King Arthur's wife. Noticing Lanval's improved fortunes and his striking good looks, she attempted to seduce him. She invited him to her chamber, praising his appearance and offering him her love. Lanval, bound by his oath to the fairy queen, and deeply loyal to his unseen beloved, politely but firmly rejected Guinevere's advances. He declared that he loved another, a lady so beautiful and noble that even the queen's plainest handmaiden would surpass Guinevere in beauty. This statement, while true to Lanval's heart, was a monumental mistake. Guinevere, furious at being rejected and insulted, accused Lanval of attempting to seduce her and, failing that, of slandering her. She went to King Arthur weeping and claiming that Lanval had dishonored her. King Arthur, enraged by the perceived insult to his queen, had Lanval arrested and put on trial. The charge was treason, a grave accusation in medieval England. Lanval, heartbroken and knowing he had broken his sacred oath, found himself in a desperate situation. Could not defend himself without revealing his love and losing his fairy queen forever. He confessed that he had indeed boasted of his lady's beauty, but he insisted that he had not dishonored the queen. Court, however, demanded proof of his mysterious lady's existence and beauty. Lanval's wealth vanished, and he became poor once more, a physical manifestation of the broken vow. The king ordered that if Lanval's lady did not appear to validate his claims, he would be hanged. On the day of the trial, just as the verdict was about to be delivered, 2 maidens appeared, riding magnificent white palfreys. They were the fairy queen's handmaidens. They rode into the court, announcing that their lady was coming to save Lanval. Shortly after, the fairy queen herself arrived, riding a white horse, her beauty so dazzling that all present were struck silent. She was more beautiful than any woman they had ever seen. She approached King Arthur, stating that Lanval had indeed told the truth, that he had rejected Guinevere because he loved a lady far more beautiful. She then revealed that Lanval had broken his oath by speaking of her, but in a gesture of profound love, she had come to save him from death. After saving Lanval, the fairy queen did not stay. She left the court, and Lanval, unable to live without her, immediately followed her. He leaped onto her horse behind her, and together they rode away, disappearing into the magical realm of Avalon, never to be seen again. Chroniclers and bards of the time would sometimes recount how on certain special days a knight could be seen riding into the land of Avalon, a testament to Lanval's enduring secret. This tale, penned by a woman writer in the 12th century, shows a love that was exclusive, bound by a vow of secrecy, and existed outside the rigid social structures of the time. It defies modern understanding by emphasizing the power of an oath, the severe consequences of its breach, and the idea that true love could transcend the human world and find its ultimate fulfillment in a hidden mystical dimension, rather than a publicly acknowledged partnership. It suggests that some loves are so precious they must remain unseen, known only to those who dare to cross the veil into another existence. Number 3. The Queen, the King, and the Royal Rebellion. This is not a sweet romance, but a saga of power, passion, and betrayal between two of the most influential figures of the 12th century, Eleanor of Aquitaine and Henry II of England. Their story is a tempestuous whirlwind that reshaped kingdoms and demonstrated how love, even between rulers, could devolve into bitter rivalry and open warfare. Born in 1122, Eleanor was a duchess in her own right. Inheriting the vast and culturally rich Duchy of Aquitaine, she was highly educated, politically astute, and fiercely independent. A woman ahead of her time, her first marriage was to Louis VII of France, a devout but rather uncharismatic king. Their union, though lasting 15 years and producing 2 daughters, was ultimately unsuccessful, marked by political disagreements and Louis's increasing religiosity. It was annulled in 1152 on grounds of consanguinity. Just 2 months after her annulment, Eleanor, still immensely powerful and desired, made a shocking move. She married Henry Plantagenet, Duke of Normandy and Count of Anjou. Henry was a monarchic, ambitious, and energetic young man. 11 years her junior, their union was a strategic masterpiece for both. For Eleanor, it meant securing a powerful partner who could defend her lands and offer a more dynamic alliance than Louis. For Henry, it doubled his territories overnight, making him the most powerful lord in France, richer and with more land than the French king himself. This was a calculated union, certainly, but contemporary accounts suggest there was also a genuine spark of attraction and ambition that bound them together. They were both strong-willed, intelligent, and fiercely driven individuals. Within 2 years of their marriage, in 1154, Henry became King of England, and Eleanor, Queen. Their combined lands stretched from the Scottish border to the Pyrenees, forming the vast Angevin Empire. For a time, their partnership was incredibly fruitful. They had 8 children, 5 sons and 3 daughters, ensuring the succession and cementing their dynasty. Eleanor, far from being a passive queen, actively participated in governance. She traveled extensively, advised Henry on political matters, and ruled Aquitaine in her own right, holding her own court that was famed for its culture and patronage of troubadours. Their early years together were a period of immense growth and stability, for their burgeoning empire a testament to their combined strength and complementary skills. However, the love between Eleanor and Henry, if it ever was a tender romantic love, began to curdle as their personalities clashed and Henry's infidelities became more blatant. Henry was a notoriously restless and hot-tempered man, constantly on the move, asserting his authority and pursuing numerous mistresses. Eleanor, a proud and independent woman, found his constant philandering and his increasingly autocratic rule intolerable. Tensions between them mounted, fueled by Henry's refusal to grant their sons any real power or lands despite their growing up. The king often said he would not unshoe himself until his sons unshoed themselves. The breaking point came in 1173. Eleanor, fed up with Henry's control and his mistresses, particularly Rosamund Clifford, known as Fair Rosamund, and frustrated by his treatment of their sons, actively encouraged her eldest sons, Henry the young king, Richard, later Richard the Lionheart, and Geoffrey to rebel against their father. This was an astonishing act, a queen actively instigating rebellion against her own husband and king, urging her children to wage war against their father. This was not a subtle behind-the-scenes manipulation. It was an open, direct challenge to his authority, born out of deep resentment and a desire for her sons to gain their rightful inheritance, and for her to reclaim her own influence. Eleanor herself attempted to join the rebellion dressed as a man in armor, but she was captured by Henry's forces near Poitiers. Henry, furious at her betrayal, had her imprisoned. For the next 15 years, Eleanor of Aquitaine, the most powerful woman in Europe, lived under house arrest, first in various English castles, then later in Winchester. She was effectively removed from power, a prisoner of her own husband. Despite her imprisonment, her influence remained, and her sons continued their sporadic rebellions against Henry, often appealing to their mother for support. Even from prison, Eleanor subtly wielded her influence, using agents and couriers to communicate with her sons and allies. She witnessed from afar the slow unraveling of Henry's reign as his sons turned against him, each seeking their own power. Her relationship with Henry, once a partnership that built an empire, became a bitter struggle for dominance, culminating in her long imprisonment. Henry II died in 1189, broken by the constant rebellions of his sons and the ultimate betrayal of his youngest and favorite, John. With Henry's death, Eleanor was immediately released from imprisonment by her son, Richard the Lionheart, who became king. She then returned to the political arena with renewed vigor, serving as regent for Richard while he was on crusade, and later when he was imprisoned. She also played a crucial role in managing the affairs of the Angevin Empire and ensuring the succession of her last surviving son, John. The story of Eleanor and Henry II defies modern understanding of love by showing how an initial strategic alliance, potentially fueled by early passion, could transform into a brutal power struggle culminating in one of the most powerful queens in history. Being imprisoned by her own husband, their relationship was not about tenderness or shared intimacy in the modern sense, but about ambition, control, and ultimately a clash of formidable wills that shaped the political landscape of medieval Europe for decades. Their love was defined by their roles as rulers first, individuals second, and the consequences were epic. Eleanor lived until 1204, outliving most of her children, a testament to her enduring spirit. Number 2. The Queen, the Knight, and the Fall of a Kingdom. This is the legendary love triangle that defined an era of chivalry and tragedy, a story of forbidden passion, loyalty, and betrayal that ultimately led to the downfall of a mythical kingdom. From the 12th century onwards, the tales of King Arthur, Queen Guinevere, and Sir Lancelot became central to the concept of courtly love, yet their narrative defies modern understanding of love, with its emphasis on adultery, the destruction it wrought, and the stark contrast. King Arthur, the noble and just ruler of Camelot, was married to Queen Guinevere, a woman renowned for her beauty and charm. Their marriage was a strategic alliance, cementing Arthur's kingdom and providing him with a queen worthy of his legendary court. Lancelot, one of Arthur's most trusted and greatest knights, was fiercely loyal to his king. And a paragon of chivalry, he was celebrated for his courage, his strength, and his unwavering dedication to the ideals of the Round Table. It was Lancelot's duty to protect Guinevere, to serve her and honor her as his queen. However, as the legends tell, a powerful, unspoken attraction grew between Guinevere and Lancelot. This was the epitome of courtly love, a highly formalized and often illicit affection between a knight and a married noblewoman, usually his lady. It was characterized by devotion, longing, and often secret meetings. Lancelot's devotion to Guinevere transcended his loyalty to Arthur. He performed heroic deeds in her name, his every act of bravery a testament to his hidden love for her. Guinevere, flattered by his adoration and perhaps feeling a lack of passionate connection with Arthur, reciprocated his feelings. Their affair, though kept secret for a time, was an open secret in the whispered corners of Camelot. While the ideals of courtly love celebrated such illicit passions as ennobling the knight, the reality was that it was a profound act of betrayal against the king, against the sacred bonds of marriage, and against the very foundation. The love between Guinevere and Lancelot was a corrosive force, a crack in the perfect facade of Camelot, slowly undermining the kingdom from within. The legends recount numerous instances of their clandestine meetings, their stolen moments of passion, and the elaborate deceptions they employed to keep their affair hidden. Yet the pressure mounted. Other knights, envious of Lancelot's favored position or suspicious of the queen's behavior, began to watch them. Sir Agravaine and Sir Mordred, Arthur's treacherous nephew or son, depending on the version, were particularly keen on exposing them, seeing an opportunity to destabilize Arthur's rule. The inevitable exposure came violently. Lancelot and Guinevere were trapped together in her chamber by Agravaine and Mordred, along with a group of knights. Lancelot, a formidable warrior, fought his way out, killing several knights in the process. But the truth of his affair with the queen was undeniable. This public exposure led to a catastrophic series of events. Guinevere, accused of treason and adultery, was condemned to be burned at the stake, a brutal punishment for such a crime in medieval law. Lancelot, true to his love, returned to rescue her from the pyre. In the ensuing battle, many more innocent knights, including some of Lancelot's kinsmen, were killed. This act of rescue, though born of love, directly pitted Lancelot against King Arthur and the Round Table. Arthur, heartbroken by the betrayal of his wife and his most trusted knight, was now forced to wage war against Lancelot, his closest friend. The kingdom was torn apart by factions, with knights choosing sides between the king and his champion. The war between Arthur and Lancelot devastated the kingdom. It led to a prolonged siege of Lancelot's castle in France and the loss of many noble lives. While Arthur was away besieging Lancelot, Mordred seized the opportunity to usurp the throne. Arthur was forced to return to England to fight Mordred in the final cataclysmic battle of Camlan. Both Arthur and Mordred were mortally wounded, and the Round Table, the symbol of perfect knighthood, was shattered forever. After Arthur's death and the destruction of his kingdom, Guinevere, filled with remorse and grief, entered a convent seeking atonement for her sins. Lancelot, devastated by the consequences of their love, became a hermit, living a life of austerity and penance. Their love, though legendary and romanticized in song and poetry, brought about the ruin of everything they held dear. They never saw each other again in life, their paths irrevocably separated by the tragedy they had wrought. This enduring legend defies modern understanding of love by demonstrating how a passionate secret affair, glorified by the concept of courtship and personal despair. It was a love that privileged intense personal desire over loyalty, duty, and the stability of an entire kingdom, culminating in profound regret and the ultimate fall of a golden age. The story served as a cautionary tale, highlighting the destructive power of unchecked passion in a world governed by honor and social order, a love that was grand in its scope but utterly devastating in its conclusion. Number 1. The Wife's Bargain for a Holy Life. This is not a tale of a knight and a lady, but of a married woman's extraordinary and often bizarre quest for spiritual purity, a journey that led her to make a deal with her husband that profoundly defies modern notions of marital intimacy and partnership. Meet Marjorie Kempe, a remarkable English mystic from the late 14th and early 15th centuries. Her spiritual autobiography, The Book of Marjorie Kempe is the earliest autobiography in the English language, offering an unparalleled glimpse into the inner life of a medieval woman, her fervent faith, and her unconventional marriage. Marjorie Kempe was born around 1373 in Lynn, Norfolk, a thriving port town. She was a shrewd businesswoman, involved in brewing and milling, and was married to John Kemp, a respectable burgess. They had 14 children. By many accounts, she lived a conventional life for many years. However, after the birth of her first child, she experienced a profound spiritual crisis marked by visions and a deep sense of unworthiness. This crisis led her to seek a life of intense piety and devotion, a path that increasingly put her at odds with societal expectations, and most notably, with her own husband. Marjorie felt a burning desire to dedicate herself entirely to God. This meant forsaking worldly pleasures, living a life of chastity, and embarking on pilgrimages to holy sites across Europe and the Holy Land. Her spiritual journey was characterized by intense emotional outbursts, often crying uncontrollably during sermons or when contemplating the Passion of Christ. These public displays of emotion, combined with her increasingly ascetic lifestyle, made her an object of both veneration and suspicion in her community. This kind of intense public piety, while not unheard of, was often seen as radical, particularly for a married woman with a large family. The most extraordinary aspect of Marjorie's story, in terms of defying modern understanding of love, is her relationship with her husband, John. Marjorie had received visions in which Christ urged her to live a life of perfect chastity, to forsake marital relations. This was a direct conflict with her duties as a wife and mother in medieval society. For a woman to deny her husband his marital rights was almost unthinkable, potentially leading to social disgrace, legal repercussions, or even physical abuse. Yet Marjorie, driven by her spiritual conviction, sought to achieve this. For years she pleaded with John to grant her a vow of chastity, to allow them to live as brother and sister. John, a patient and perhaps bewildered man, resisted her pleas. He was a man of his time, expecting the full companionship of a wife, including sexual intimacy and the production of children. The book vividly recounts Marjorie's persistent arguments, her tears, and her relentless spiritual pressure on John. She argued that God called her to a higher life, a life of purity, that could only be achieved through complete abstinence. Finally, in 1413, after much spiritual torment and persistent negotiation, Marjorie and John made a remarkable agreement while traveling together. She had fallen into a deep spiritual depression, distressed by her inability to achieve perfect chastity. John, concerned by her distress, agreed to a bargain. He consented to her vow of chastity on 2 conditions. First, that she would stop her public crying during sermons, which embarrassed him, and second, that she would eat with him on Fridays. Marjorie, overjoyed, immediately accepted these terms. This bargain of chastity is a profound example of how love and marriage were negotiated in the medieval period, often in ways that portray spiritual aspirations over physical intimacy, but also how personal desires could be tempered by social conventions. It reveals a marriage dynamic where one partner's extreme spiritual calling fundamentally reshaped the very nature of their union. For Marjorie, this was an act of profound love for God, and for John, it was an act of immense patience, compromise, and perhaps a unique understanding of his wife's fervent devotion, even if he did not fully share it. After the agreement, Marjorie embarked on extensive pilgrimages, leaving John for long periods. She traveled to Jerusalem, Rome, Compostela, and many other holy sites, encountering dangers, ridicule, and even accusations of heresy due to her unconventional behavior and her dramatic crying. John, meanwhile, remained in Lynn, managing their household and family, seemingly accepting her extraordinary spiritual quest. Later in life, when John became frail and elderly, Marjorie, despite her spiritual aspirations and her vow of chastity, returned home to care for him. She wheeled him around in a cart, feeding him, cleaning him, and fulfilling the duties of a medieval wife, demonstrating a different kind of love and commitment, one of practical care and enduring companionship, even after the cessation of physical intimacy. Marjorie's account of her marriage defies modern understanding because it presents a relationship partner's profound spiritual journey dictates the terms of intimacy. Where public displays of faith lead to domestic nicolations. Her story is a testament to the complex, often strained but enduring nature of marriage. In the Middle Ages, where love could take many forms, including a radical devotion to God that reshaped the very foundations. She died sometime after 1438, leaving behind a unique and challenging record of her life and her love.